The prairie wind was a mournful singer at dusk, its voice whispering through the tall grasses that guarded the long, empty road to Gabriel Ashford's ranch. It was a sound he knew as well as his own breathing. But tonight it carried a different note, a fragile human sound that did not belong. He paused on the porch of his home, a house built of sun-bleached pine that smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender, its swing groaning softly as if in sympathy. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter Annabelle pointed a small finger toward the bottom step. "Papa," she whispered, her voice laced with a child's instinctive awe at the unusual. "There's a lady sleeping." It was not sleep. Gabriel recognized the collapsed stillness of utter exhaustion the moment he saw her. A young woman, barely more than a girl, lay crumpled on the lowest porch step, her face turned away from the last vestiges of the setting sun. Her dress was worn thin and coated in the fine red dust of the Montana territories, her traveling bag beside her, looking as weary as its owner. In one hand, she clutched a small torn piece of cardboard, holding it against her chest, with a grip that even unconsciousness had not loosened. He moved cautiously, every instinct honed by years of solitude on the frontier, screaming at him to be wary of strangers. But as he knelt beside her, he saw not a threat, but a tragedy. Her face was pale beneath the grime, her lips cracked from thirst. She couldn't be more than 16, with features that might have been pretty, if not for the gaunt hollows beneath her cheekbones. She was a child who had been pushed past her limit and left to fall. "Annabelle, go fetch some water from the basin," he said quietly, his voice gentle so as not to startle the girl if she was on the edge of consciousness. He carefully brushed a stray strand of matted brown hair from her forehead. She was burning with a low fever, her skin dry and hot to the touch. Her fingers uncurled slightly, and he saw what she was holding so tightly. It was half of a photograph torn raggedly down the middle. It showed the face of a woman with kind eyes and a soft smile, a face that held a world of love in its fading sepia tones. He felt a pang of recognition, not for the woman in the picture, but for the fierce, protective desperation in the girl's grip. It was the look of someone holding on to the only piece of home they had left in the world. Annabelle returned with a dipper of water and a damp cloth. Gabriel supported the stranger's head, tipping a few drops of water against her lips. Her eyes fluttered dark and unfocused before a soft moan escaped her. "It's all right," he murmured, though he had no idea if it was. "You're safe now." He dipped the cloth in the water and gently wiped the dust from her face, revealing the youthful lines of a girl who should be worrying about church socials and dance cards, not collapsing on a stranger's porch hundreds of miles from anywhere. With an effort that seemed to drain his own strength, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of feed, a bundle of brittle bones, and exhausted hope. He carried her inside, into the warm, familiar scent of his home. Annabelle trailed behind her usual stream of questions, silenced by the solemnity of the moment. He laid the girl on the worn sofa near the stone fireplace, covering her with a quilt his late wife Catherine had stitched years ago. As he did, the torn photograph fell from her hand onto the floor. Annabelle picked it up, her small fingers tracing the smiling face. "Is that her mama?" she asked. "I think so, little bird." Gabriel answered, his gaze fixed on the unconscious girl. He didn't know who she was or what troubles had driven her to his doorstep. But looking at the photograph of the mother she clung to, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not turn her away. This stranger, lost and broken, had stumbled into their quiet life of grief and routine. And for the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt the unnerving and undeniable pull of a world beyond his own carefully guarded sorrow. For 2 days, Meredith drifted in a feverish haze, caught between the waking world and nightmares of a jolting wagon and a father's cold, final handshake. She was aware of gentle hands tending to her, a soft voice that called her sweetheart, and the taste of cool water on her parched lips. When her fever finally broke, she woke to the quiet sounds of a home at peace. The morning sun streamed through a clean window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She was lying in a small, simple room, the bed beneath her soft, the quilt over her warm and smelling faintly of lavender. The door creaked open, and a little girl with serious eyes and hair the color of summer wheat peered in. "You're awake," she stated, as if confirming a long-held hypothesis. Before Meredith could find her voice, the girl was gone, her small feet pattering down a wooden hallway. A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall and lean, a man carved from the frontier itself. With hands that spoke of honest work and eyes that held depths of sorrow she recognized as a mirror to her own. Traces of silver threaded the dark hair at his temples, though he looked to be no more than 35. "How are you feeling?" His voice was gentle like the wind through prairie grass. Thirsty Meredith managed to whisper, her throat raw. He returned with a glass of water, helping her sit up to drink. The simple act of kindness was so unexpected, it brought tears to her eyes. She tried to hide them, ashamed of her weakness. "I'm Gabriel Ashford," he said, taking the empty glass. "And that was my daughter, Annabelle. You collapsed on our porch a few nights ago. You've had a bit of a fever." Meredith's hand flew to her apron pocket, her fingers searching for the one thing that mattered. It was gone. A knot of panic tightened in her stomach. My photograph. "It's safe," Gabriel assured her. He retrieved it from the small bedside table where it sat propped against a water pitcher. "Annabelle's been keeping an eye on it for you." Relief washed over her, so potent it left her dizzy. She took the torn half her thumb, stroking her mother's face. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to be a burden. I can work. I'm good with cooking and cleaning. I can earn my keep." The words tumbled out, a rehearsed plea she had been practicing for weeks. Gabriel regarded her with a quiet understanding that unnerved her. "First, let's get some food in you. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days." Over the next week, a slow, cautious rhythm established itself. Meredith, still weak but determined not to be useless, began to help with small chores. She mended one of Annabelle's dresses with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She kneaded bread in the warm kitchen, the familiar motion, a comfort, her hands remembering the skills her mother had taught her. She moved through their home like a ghost, at first silent and watchful, terrified of taking up too much space, of making a sound that might get her sent away. Gabriel gave her space, never pressing for the story of how she had ended up on his porch. He spoke in a gentle but sparse cadence, communicating more through action than words. He showed her how to properly feed the chickens, his large, calloused hands demonstrating the motion with quiet patience. He left a bowl of wildflowers on the kitchen table one morning, a splash of color that made the simple room feel beautiful. He was a man accustomed to solitude, yet his home was not an unwelcoming place. It was a sanctuary guarded by grief, but not defined by it. Annabelle, however, had no such reservations. She was the heart of the small family, her innocent but insightful questions slowly chipping away at the walls Meredith had built around herself. She followed Meredith through her chores, a small constant shadow chattering about the ranch, the horses, and her lessons with Miss Peterson in town. "Papa says you have sad eyes," Annabelle announced one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Meredith's hands stilled. "Does he?" "Yes. He says they look like his did after Mama went to heaven." The child's frankness was disarming. "My Mama's name was Catherine. She was beautiful. Papa keeps her picture in the big chest. He looks at it sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching." Later that day, Gabriel found Meredith staring out at the vast, star-dusted sky, a nightly ritual she had adopted. The Montana landscape was an awesome thing, the red sand glowing under the sun by day, the immense silence of the night broken only by the call of a distant hawk or the rustle of dry grass. Catherine used to love the stars, he said, joining her at the porch rail. The words were offered simply a piece of his past, shared without expectation. She said they reminded her that our troubles were small in the grand scheme of things. Do you miss her terribly? The question slipped out more intimate than anything she had dared ask before. A shadow passed behind his eyes, a fleeting glimpse of a wound that would never fully heal. Every day. But it's different now. The pain isn't as sharp. It's more like a quiet ache I've learned to live with. He looked at her, then his gaze direct. Having you here. It doesn't replace what I lost. But it reminds me that the house can be filled with something other than silence. A warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar and unnerving, like a forgotten muscle twitching back to life. It was hope, she realized, and it was terrifying. She had learned that hope was a dangerous thing. It made you vulnerable. The turning point came on an evening thick with the scent of rain. Meredith was tucking Annabelle into bed, a nightly ritual that had become the anchor of her days. She had finished telling a story about a princess who finds a home in an enchanted forest, when Annabelle reached out and took her hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. The child's serious eyes were fixed on her face, her expression solemn. In a soft whisper that changed everything, she asked, "Will you be our mother?" The question was a blow, both beautiful and painful. It was the deepest desire of a lonely child, and the most impossible thing Meredith could imagine. A mother was a protector, a source of unconditional love, a permanent fixture. Meredith was none of those things. She was a runaway, a piece of property sold and unclaimed, living on the charity of a kind stranger. "Oh, sweetheart," she began, her throat tight. "I don't know if—" "Papa likes you." Annabelle interrupted, her logic irrefutable. "And I like you. And you make better pancakes than he does. It makes sense." Meredith sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the child's question settling over her. For weeks, she had been focused only on survival, on earning her keep day by day. She hadn't allowed herself to think about the future, about what would happen when her welcome ran out. But Annabelle's question wasn't about the future, it was about the now. It was a plea to stay, to belong. Looking into that small, hopeful face, Meredith realized she was tired of surviving. She wanted to live. She wanted this house with its scent of wood smoke and lavender. She wanted this man with his quiet kindness and sad eyes. She wanted this child who had looked at her, a broken stranger, and seen a mother. For the first time, she felt the stirring of a fight within her, a desire not just to accept her fate, but to choose it. She squeezed Annabelle's hand. "I would like that more than anything in the world," she whispered. It wasn't a promise she knew if she could keep, but it was a declaration. She would no longer be a passive victim of her circumstances. She would stay. She would fight for this fragile, burgeoning hope. And as she looked at the little girl who had just handed her a reason to be brave, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that her life had finally begun. The sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning like gunfire. Meredith looked up from hanging laundry on the line, one of Annabelle's small dresses still clutched in her hands. The rhythmic thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth sent a sliver of ice through her veins. In her short life, she had learned to fear the sound of men arriving unannounced. It never heralded good news. Gabriel emerged from the barn, his face grim, as he counted the 5 riders cresting the hill. Dust clouds marked their approach, like storm warnings against the brilliant blue sky. Annabelle appeared in the doorway of the house, her eyes wide with the instinctive fear of a child who senses danger in the air. "Get inside," Gabriel called to them, his voice carrying an authority Meredith had never heard before. "Now." She was already moving toward the house, ushering Annabelle before her when she saw him. He was exactly as her father had described, thick-built and mean-eyed, with hands that looked like they knew how to hurt things. Vernon Cade, the man her father had sold her to. Cade reined in his horse just short of the porch, his gaze sweeping the property before fixing on Meredith, where she stood frozen by the laundry line. A predatory, satisfied smile spread across his face, making her stomach clench. "There she is," he said, his voice carrying the rough edges of too much whiskey. "My little bride. Been looking all over creation for you, girl." Gabriel stepped between them, placing himself squarely in Cade's line of sight. His hand rested casually near the pistol at his hip, a gesture that looked natural, but was coiled with deadly tension. "You're on my property. State your business." Cade's smile widened, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "My business is that girl right there. Got papers that say she belongs to me fair and square." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, waving it like a flag of victory. "Paid her daddy $75 for her. Bill of sale all legal and proper." "People aren't property," Gabriel said, his voice dangerously quiet. The steel in it made the horses shift nervously. "This one is," Cade retorted, his eyes never leaving Meredith. She felt stripped bare under his gaze. Bought and paid for. Her daddy was real grateful. Said she'd been nothing but a burden since her mama died. Promised me she was clean and biddable. The words were physical blows. She had known her father considered her a burden, but to hear it confirmed so casually, so cruelly, made her legs feel weak. Behind Gabriel, Annabelle made a small, frightened sound. "The girl stays here," Gabriel stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever arrangement you had with her father, she's under my protection now." Cade laughed, a sound like gravel sliding down a hillside. "Your protection? You got no claim on her, rancher. She's mine by law." He gestured to his men, who spread out slightly, their hands drifting toward their weapons. "Now I've been patient. Tracked her all the way from Colorado. I ain't leaving empty-handed." "She's not going anywhere," Gabriel repeated. Something in his stance, an immovable stillness, made Cade's smile falter. Cade's gaze shifted, landing on the small figure of Annabelle, peering from behind the doorframe. "You got a child here," he observed, his voice turning sly. "Shame if something happened to upset this peaceful life." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air like smoke. Meredith saw Gabriel's entire body go rigid. She knew with the terrifying clarity of crisis that this good man would fight for her. He would risk his home, his safety, even his daughter's security, rather than let Cade take her. And she could not let that happen. "I'll go," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. She stepped forward before Gabriel could stop her. The words tasted like ash. "I'll go with you. Just leave them alone." "Meredith, no." Gabriel turned to her, panic flaring in his eyes. "Yes, I do," she insisted, trying to keep her voice steady against the terror clawing at her throat. "It's what the law says, isn't it? I belong to him." Cade's laugh was triumphant. "Smart girl. Knows when she's beat. Come on then, get your things." But as Meredith started toward the house, Annabelle broke free and ran to her, wrapping her small arms around Meredith's waist with desperate strength. "No," the child sobbed into her dress. "You can't go. You can't leave us. You promised." The sound of Annabelle's crying broke something inside Meredith. This little girl, who had already lost one mother, was about to lose another. The sheer injustice of it ignited a hot, bright anger in her core. She knelt, hugging the trembling child. "Let me go, sweetheart," she whispered. But the words were a lie. Nothing would be all right. Gabriel's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "I won't let him take you," he said, his voice low and resolute. "It'll cost you your daughter's safety," Kate interjected. "Maybe more." Gabriel stepped forward again, placing himself squarely between Cade and the two people he had decided were his to protect. "The contract might say she's yours, but the girl says different. And in Montana territory, a woman has the right to refuse a marriage, even if papers have been signed." Cade's expression darkened. "That ain't how it works where I come from." "Well, you're not where you come from," Gabriel replied evenly. "You're on my land, and the law here says different." For a long moment, the two men faced each other, the air thick with the promise of violence. Cade finally spat in the dust at Gabriel's feet. "You think hiding behind some territorial law will save you? I got friends, rancher. Friends who don't care much for law when it gets in the way of business." "And I've got neighbors," Gabriel countered. "Good people who don't take kindly to men who threaten children." "We'll see about that." Cade swung back into his saddle, his face twisted with rage. "This ain't over. That girl's mine by right, and I mean to have what's mine." He wheeled his horse around his men, following suit. Before they rode off, he called back over his shoulder, his voice a venomous promise. "You got 3 days to think it over, rancher. 3 days to decide if that girl's worth dying for." The sound of their departure was as violent as their arrival. When the dust settled, the three of them stood in the sudden ringing silence, holding on to each other. Gabriel's arms came around them, both strong and protective. "What are we going to do?" Meredith whispered against his chest. "We're going to fight," he said simply. Annabelle pulled back to look up at them, her face streaked with tears, but her small jaws set with the same determination she had inherited from her father. "He can't have you," she said fiercely, her gaze fixed on Meredith. "You're ours now." The child's simple, absolute declaration filled Meredith with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. These people had chosen her. They had claimed her when she had nowhere else to go. Now it was time for her to choose them back, whatever the cost. The ride into Willow Creek the next morning felt like a journey through a hostile world. Gabriel kept a rifle across his saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, while Meredith held Annabelle close on the wagon seat. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Their first stop was Judge Morrison, a thin, scholarly man with ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened to Gabriel's story with careful attention, his brow furrowed as he examined the bill of sale Cade had flashed. "The territorial law is clear," the judge said finally, his tone offering a sliver of hope. "A woman cannot be compelled into marriage against her will regardless of any prior agreements. In the eyes of Montana law, you are free, miss." Relief flooded through Meredith, so potent it was dizzying. But the judge's expression grew troubled. "Legally, yes. But I've heard of this Cade. He has connections to unscrupulous characters who operate outside the law. They don't care what territorial statutes say." He penned a document with brisk, angry strokes. "I'll issue a restraining order forbidding Cade from approaching you. Sheriff Williams can serve it. But practically speaking, I suggest you prepare for trouble. Men like Cade don't accept legal defeats gracefully." They left with a piece of paper that felt as flimsy as an autumn leaf. Sheriff Williams, a grizzled man with a steady gaze that had kept peace in Willow Creek for 15 years, confirmed their fears. "I'll serve it, Gabriel," he said, studying the order. "But you know as well as I do that paper won't stop bullets. Cade's the type who settles disputes with lead-knot lawyers." "How many deputies can you spare?" Gabriel asked. 2, maybe 3. But I can't have them camp at your ranch permanently. I'm responsible for the whole county." The sheriff's apology was in his weary eyes. "Do what you can, Gabe. and be careful." Word of their trouble had already spread through the small town with the speed of a prairie fire. As Gabriel purchased extra ammunition at Murphy's general store, Mrs. Murphy, a kindly woman who had known him since he was a boy, pressed a basket of fresh bread and preserves into Meredith's hands. "You tell that Gabriel he's got friends here," she said firmly, her hand covering Meredith's. "Good people don't stand by when bullies come calling." The sentiment was echoed up and down Main Street. The blacksmith offered to loan Gabriel extra rifles. The preacher promised to organize a watch. The solidarity was overwhelming, but it also highlighted the danger. Meredith's presence was putting this entire community at risk. On the ride home, she voiced her fear. "Maybe I should just leave," she said quietly so Annabelle couldn't hear over the wagon's rattle. "Go somewhere Cade can't find me. It would be safer for everyone." Gabriel's hands tightened on the reins. Running won't solve it. Men like Cade don't give up. They hunt. Besides, he turned to her, his expression raw with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "If you're not here." Annabelle loses the best thing that's happened to her since her mother died. "And I lose—" He stopped, his jaw working as he struggled for words. "I lose the first real happiness I've felt in 7 years." The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. That evening, as if to prove his point about community neighbors, began arriving. Tom Bradley rode over from the adjoining property, his eldest son in tow, both carrying rifles. The Williamson brothers came from their spread 5 miles south, grim-faced men who knew how to handle trouble. "Heard you might need some extra eyes watching the horizon," Tom said, simply settling his horse. "Me and the boy can take first watch." By sunset, a dozen ranchers and their grown sons had formed an impromptu militia, posting sentries at strategic points around the property. They were a quiet, determined force, men of the land, who understood that an attack on one was an attack on all. Meredith moved through the kitchen preparing coffee and food, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She had never known what it felt like to be protected, to have people willing to stand between her and harm. Late that night, after Annabelle was asleep and the sentries had settled into their watches, Gabriel found her by the kitchen window, staring out at the dark prairie. "I keep thinking about what you said," she whispered, not turning around. "About happiness." He came to stand beside her. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said softly. "Just let yourself have it, even if it doesn't last. Happiness is precious because it's fragile. That doesn't make it less real." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I've watched you with Annabelle. You have good instincts. She's already half in love with you. And you," the question slipped out bold and vulnerable in the darkness. His silence stretched long enough that she began to regret asking. Then he squeezed her hand. "I'm getting there," he said simply. She turned to him. And then this good man, who looked at her as if she were worth fighting for, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe she might be. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, wild and free. Meredith closed her eyes and listened, letting the sound remind her that even in the most dangerous of times, beautiful things endured. 3 days passed in tense quiet. On the 4th morning, Meredith woke to the sound of Annabelle's labored breathing. The child's face was flushed with fever, her small body trembling. When Meredith pressed a hand to her forehead, the heat was alarming. "Gabriel," she called, her voice tight with panic. He was there in seconds. One look at his daughter sent him into a flurry of controlled action. "I'll get Tom Bradley to ride for Doc Henley." He knelt beside the bed, his large hand gentle on Annabelle's burning brow. "Hey there, little bird. Papa's here." Annabelle's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Mama," she whispered, and Gabriel's face went pale. The child's fevered gaze found Meredith, and she reached out a trembling hand. "Don't go away. Please don't go away like Mama did." "I'm not going anywhere, baby girl," Meredith promised, her throat constricting. "I promise." Throughout the long day, she never left Annabelle's side. She bathed the child's face with cool water, held her through shivering fits, and sang the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. She poured all the love and care she had been denied into this little girl, her movements sure and steady. Doc Henley arrived at sunset, his face grim. "It's a fever that's been going around," he announced after a long examination. "Should break in another day or two, but she needs careful watching." His gaze fell on Meredith. "From what I've seen, Miss Meredith here has all the skills of a trained nurse. Keep doing what you're doing." Before he left, he pulled Gabriel aside. "Word in town is that Cade fellow's been asking questions about your setup. He knows about your neighbors keeping watch. Be extra careful." That night, as Gabriel stood guard with the other men, Meredith maintained her vigil. Near dawn, Annabelle stirred her eyes clear for the first time in 2 days. "You stayed," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "I promised I would." The child struggled to sit up. "Are you really going to be my mama?" The question hung in the quiet room, stripped of all pretense. Meredith looked at this brave little girl and felt the last of her own fear fall away. "Would you like me to be?" More than anything, Annabelle said, her conviction absolute. "Papa needs you too, even if he's too scared to say so." Later that morning, Mrs. Williamson and several other women from town arrived bearing food and offers of help. Their visit was a subtle but thorough examination. They watched how Meredith moved through Gabriel's kitchen with confidence, how she spoke of Annabelle with genuine affection. When one of them remarked that the house felt more like a home than it had in years, Meredith knew she had passed some crucial test. "That Cade fellow came sniffing around our place yesterday," Mrs. Williamson said, her tone hardening, "asking about Gabriel's routines. My husband sent him on his way with a shotgun, but he's not giving up." The warning chilled Meredith, but it also strengthened her resolve. That evening, Gabriel found her on the porch watching the sunset. "You saved her," he said simply. "Doc Henley said your nursing made the difference. It wasn't just the nursing. It was you being here, giving her something to fight for. She was afraid you'd disappear like her mother did." He stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "You've become essential to us, Meredith. I can't imagine our lives without you anymore." The words she had been afraid to hope for hung in the air between them. When he leaned down and kissed her soft and full of promise, the last of her walls crumbled. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you," he replied, holding her close. "Both of you, my girls." 2 weeks later, as life settled into a new precious normalcy, Sheriff Williams rode out to the ranch, his expression more serious than ever. "Gabrielle, I need to see your property deed," he said without preamble. Puzzled, Gabriel retrieved the old document from the family chest. The sheriff spread it on the kitchen table, his finger tracing a line of small print. "My God, Gabriel. Do you know what this says about mineral rights?" "No. Father never mentioned anything." "According to this, your family retained all mineral rights. Everything underneath the ground." The sheriff looked up, his eyes wide with the magnitude of his discovery. "A territory survey crew came through last month. They found silver deposits running right through your property. Rich ore, Gabriel. Enough to make you one of the richest men in the territory." The room fell silent. Meredith felt the blood drain from her face as the true ugly shape of Cade's obsession became clear. "He never wanted me." She whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. He wanted the land. The marriage contract was never about a bride, the sheriff confirmed grimly. It was about getting a legal claim to property he knew was valuable. You, Meredith, were just the key to unlock a fortune. The quiet peace they had fought for was an illusion. The real battle she now understood had not even begun. The next afternoon, a buggy approached under a white flag of truce. Vernon Cade sat beside a well-dressed lawyer with cold, calculating eyes. Ashford Cade called out, his voice slick with false civility. "Time we had a conversation. This is Mr. Hammond. He has a proposition for you." Hammond stepped down, his polished shoes ill-suited for the dusty ranch yard. "Mr. Ashford, my clients are prepared to offer you $50,000 for your mineral rights, plus another $20,000 for the land itself. In return, all claims regarding your wife's previous contract will be dropped." The sum was staggering. But Meredith saw the trap. "And if we refuse?" she asked, her voice steady. Hammond's smile did not reach his eyes. "Well, Mrs. Ashford, there are other ways to acquire property. Accidents happen. Unfortunate encounters with claim jumpers." He turned his gaze on Gabriel. "We'll even relocate you. California, perhaps. New life, all expenses paid. You have 48 hours to decide." It was Annabelle who broke the tense silence. She stepped forward, her small hands on her hips. "This is our home," she said, her voice ringing with a 7-year-old's fierce and simple truth. "You can't just take people's homes." Cade laughed, an ugly grating sound. "Child's got spirit. Shame she don't understand how the world really works." That was Gabriel's breaking point. In one fluid motion, he raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Cade's chest. "Get off my land," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now." As the buggy drove away, the weight of their impossible choice settled over them. Accept the money and live in exile, or refuse and face the full force of an enemy with limitless resources. The community, already strained by Cade's earlier attacks on neighboring ranches, barns burned, cattle scattered, was wavering. Men had their own families to protect. But the next morning, they were not alone. A procession of wagons and riders appeared on the road, not with weapons, but with baskets of food, musical instruments, and a bolt of white cotton fabric. It was Reverend Patterson, Mrs. Murphy, and half the town of Willow Creek. "Heard you two were planning to get married in a hurry," Mrs. Murphy called out cheerfully, shaking out a simple but beautiful wedding dress. "Figured you might need a proper celebration first." They had come not just to offer support, but to stand as witnesses, to defy Cade and his lawyers with the most powerful statement they could make, the public and holy union of this family. As the women whisked Meredith away, helping her into the borrowed dress and a veil that had been in one family for 3 generations, Mrs. Patterson pressed a delicate silver locket into her hand. "This was Catherine's," she said softly. "She told me that someday it should go to the woman who loved her family after she was gone." With tears in her eyes, Meredith fastened the locket around her neck. Gabriel waited at the makeshift altar on the porch. Annabelle, a crown of wildflowers in her hair, walked beside Meredith, her hand tucked trustingly into hers. As Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. But on the ridge overlooking the ranch, a lone figure on horseback watched the proceedings. Vernon Cade. The celebration was joyous, but shadowed by his menacing presence. "This isn't over," Gabriel Tom Bradley warned as the neighbors departed. "It's just beginning." Later, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, Meredith rested her head on Gabriel's chest. A dust storm was brewing on the horizon, the wind picking up, rattling the windows. "I have something to tell you," she whispered, her hand moving to her still flat belly. "I'm carrying your child." Gabriel held her tighter, a fierce protective love shining in his eyes. Now they had more than just their home to fight for. They had a future. The attack came at dawn. The brewing dust storm had arrived, whipping sand into the air, obscuring vision and muffling sound. It was the perfect cover. From her position at the parlor window, Meredith could just make out the shapes of nearly 40 men advancing on the house. Gabriel was no longer just a rancher. He was the cavalry sergeant he had once been, his commands sharp and clear. Alliances had been forged in secret. Neighbors who had seemed to fall away had only been biding their time. Men Gabriel had served with, summoned by urgent messages, had arrived under the cover of darkness. They were outnumbered, but they were soldiers and ranchers fighting for their homes, not hired guns fighting for a paycheck. "They'll try to surround us and wait for the storm to break," Gabriel said, his old military saber, a relic he had taken down from the mantelpiece, gleaming at his hip. "We won't let them." The first volley from the defenders was a disciplined, coordinated assault that shocked Cade's men. They had expected a desperate family, not a prepared fighting force. The battle devolved into a chaotic, swirling skirmish fought in the choking dust. Meredith loaded and fired with steady hands, her fear replaced by a cold, protective rage. This was her home. This was her family. No one was taking it from her. She saw Gabriel moving through the chaos, a leader in his element, rallying his men, driving the attackers back. He fought with a ferocity she had never witnessed a man defending not just land, but a life, a wife, and an unborn child. The stakes were absolute. From a captured gunman bleeding out in the dirt, the final piece of the puzzle was revealed to the sheriff, who had arrived with his few deputies to join the fray. It was never just the silver, the man gasped. Cade's father was partners with Ashford's old man decades ago. Claimed he was cheated out of his share of this land. Cade's been nursing that grudge his whole life. This is revenge. He wants to take back what he thinks is his family's legacy. The revelation transformed the battle from a fight over resources into a deeply personal, generational confrontation. Cade wasn't just greedy. He was obsessed. The fight surged toward the main house. Cade, his face a mask of fury, led a final desperate charge, screaming for his men to burn them out. The wind howled, fanning the flames of a burning outbuilding, threatening to engulf the entire ranch. It was then through a gap in the swirling dust that Meredith saw her shot. Cade, bellowing orders, was exposed for a fleeting second. She raised her rifle, took a steadying breath, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The sight of their leader falling, combined with the disciplined resistance, broke the attacker's will. The hired guns, seeing their payday disappear into the dust, and blood began to retreat. The battle was won. As the dust began to settle, revealing the wreckage of the fight, the community emerged. Neighbors came with buckets of water to douse the remaining fires, with bandages for the wounded, with food for the weary fighters. They had stood together, and they would rebuild together. Amidst the wreckage, Gabriel found Meredith. He was bruised and exhausted, a cut bleeding freely on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and full of love. He gently took her face in his hands, his touch a reassurance that they had survived. "It's over," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're safe," she whispered, leaning into his strength. They stood together, looking out at the rising sun as it broke through the last of the dust clouds, illuminating the land they had fought for. In the quiet that followed the storm and the battle, they spoke of the future of the baby, of the life they would build from these ashes, stronger and more resilient than before. 6 months later, the Montana sun shone down on a peaceful, thriving ranch. The scars of the battle had been erased, replaced by fresh paint and the sounds of new life. The christening of their son, Samuel Gabriel Ashford, was a quiet affair attended by the neighbors who had become their family and the men who had fought beside them. Annabelle, now a proud older sister, held the baby with a seriousness that befitted her new role. That evening, after their guests had departed, Gabriel led Meredith out to the porch. The swing groaned its familiar gentle song in the prairie wind. In his hands, he held a new official document from the territorial office. He placed it in her hands. It was the property deed newly registered. But this time, a second name was listed alongside his own, Meredith Ashford. "This land isn't mine," he said, his voice thick with a love that had been tested by fire and found true. "It's ours. A home you fought for." She looked down at the paper, her name written in crisp, clear ink. She thought of the crumpled, tear-stained bill of sale her father had signed, a document that had declared her property. This new deed was its redemption. It was a testament to her journey from an unwanted girl to a cherished wife, a loving mother, and a respected partner. Here on this land, under this vast sky, she had found not just a sanctuary, but herself. She was home.